John. So one of the sister companies at Black Hills is Offensive Countermeasures, and they sell a product it's called AI Hunter. That I believe he offered that to anyone who's like protecting the elections, like for free. I'm pretty sure he just straight up like offered it.
That's cool.
Yeah, but us, like I haven't had anything, any tests or anything associated with it.
I mean, this election I haven't been involved, but for 2016 and prior, when I was at Duo, I literally worked on RNC, DNC, the Trump organization.
Oh,
It was crazy. It was insane. I mean, like, because everyone was getting owned, right? And two-factor, of course, is the control that stops a lot of what was going on. Doesn't stop everything, right? But yeah, it's kind of interesting to watch this election. And then also, one of my friends in Michigan is the CISO for the DNC this year.
Mm-hmm.
Or the Biden campaign, I guess, right? So yeah, it's just interesting to hear the different perspectives, right? Of some of the risks being considered.
Oh, yeah.
It's quite interesting.
For sure. Yeah, Duo got angry at me a few years ago.
What did you do?
Well,
was it like?
I wrote a blog post about bypassing MFA on basically like O365 and EWS, and in my demo I was testing it against an environment that had Duo, and I try to make it clear that it wasn't just like a Duo specific problem. Like it's pretty much any like third party MFA vendor would have the same problem. But yeah, they saw the video of Duo and they're like, you need to make this way more clear that it's not just Duo.
Oh wow!
So I ran product management at that time, or product marketing. So like I got to write like, how are we going to respond to this, right? And it's like, I agree with you. The logic is like, well, yeah, if you enable certain factors, you can bypass them in certain ways, and if you don't have the right settings and controls, which I think a lot of what we can discuss today is just that. And
oh, absolutely, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's all configuration, like how you're implementing the stuff.
Yes, and so yeah, it was kind of interesting. Like there's even products that help you bypass Duo. I don't know if you've ever heard of like don'tduo.com, but like it essentially answers a phone call if you have phone call enabled.
Oh wait, yes, I have heard of that. Yeah.
And so end users at universities would enroll because they would pay just as much for Duo, a license of that, as Duo costs, because they want to bypass the security control, right? So it's rather fascinating, some of the things we ran into. But hey, officially, I'll kick us off. Thanks everybody for taking a moment to join. I'm joined here by Bo Bullock. I called you security expert. We weren't sure what title to give you.
That's fine.
And you're with Black Hills, among I think other things. What other things are you involved in?
So I work for Black Hills. I have my own company that's basically like how I do the trainings and stuff. I teach for my company called Breakforge. I also have done a number of different like videos in the past for Security Weekly, and yeah, that's done plenty of con talks, that kind of stuff. But yeah, mainly Black Hills is the main place for me.
Sweet. Yeah, so I think if you want an extended version of what we're talking about today, your training classes are a great approach. I think Amanda just attended one, right?
I did. Yeah, that's pretty great. You're giving it again at Secure WV, right?
Yeah, next week. So starting Monday. Yeah, there's still some seats open too.
Very cool.
Sweet. What's the URL for that if anybody's interested?
You know? If you just go to wildwesthackinfest.com, there's a link at the top there for Secure West Virginia trainings.
Cool. And Amanda Berlin on the Blumira side, detection engineer, an attendee of Bo's class. It's good.
All right, he'll take one of my classes eventually.
Sweet. So we already, I mean, I think it's interesting. We already were talking a little bit about cloud security on the interaction between like security controls being one of the things that you can really get wrong. And I think the interesting thing there is like, yeah, just because something's in product, the default does not mean secure. It's probably a big thing from what you pointed out.
Yeah, so not only just default, but yeah, not only just like default, because like, you know, sometimes the default settings actually can be pretty good. And sometimes like, so for example, with with Azure with O365, you have default or security defaults, which is like enabled on every free account, which is not terrible. It actually turns on MFA and stuff. But then you turn that off to enable conditional access policies, and now you're in charge of making sure all that other stuff is turned on, and it just it goes downhill from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's gotten better like over the years, right? Like I mean, the whole Amazon S3 bucket thing.
Oh yeah,
was super bad, and I mean, it's still not perfect, right? But
it's really hard
they've gotten
to
better
go
by default.
It's really hard to go just publish a public S3 bucket now. Like meaning like it takes like multiple steps. Like it takes like at least a good 4 clicks to say, yes, I'm sure I want to publish this to the internet. And
yeah.
A good barrier to entry. That'd be a good use case for like the double authentication, 2 people approving, right? Which I always got requests for. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so taking a step in, I think a lot of people I think there's a few different layers here when we talk about cloud detection and cloud security, right? You have the platform side, so you have things like AWS, Azure, and GCP. There's some a long tail of other ones as well. You then have the identity stack, right? So Azure is an example. Duo could be an example to some extent. Okta, and other SSO identity products, right? And then I think the last piece is you have the actual application. So like the collaboration stacks, the G Suites, the Office 365, the applications that might be running or storing data, Salesforce, HubSpot, all that fun stuff, right? First off is like, and you log into one of those like the infrastructure products, and there's 1,000 different things you can choose. So I think there's a concept of being overwhelmed, but like, what's logically the right way to start to approach even security as it relates to the complexity of these tools?
Yeah, so I think it definitely starts at the like identity level for any of this, right? Like I think most traditional organizations are really used to just running like AD, right? Like internal to their organization. So they're used to building users out, building policies, building GPOs, things that allow users to access certain things on the network, that kind of stuff. But now when you start pivoting that to cloud-based resources, you just have to take the same approach, right? Like you have to say, okay, now there's just a lot more things. What are we going to specify that they have access to, what permissions and whatnot? But I think that setting that up initially can be hard, right? Like setting up the actual like for example, you mentioned like Duo, Okta. Like if you use any of those like third-party SSO platforms, you're going to have to make sure that you're doing as the vendor says to actually set the stuff up right. Because like we're mentioning right at the beginning of the call, Duo, one of the things that I mentioned in the past is that like if you enable Duo on, let's say like an OWA portal back in the day, it didn't actually just disable EWS, Exchange Web Services, right? So that's one of the things that you have to make sure you're following the guidelines to actually like go turn that stuff off. It's a little bit more work, right? Like it's a little bit more work to go and say, all right, I'm making this more secure, but at the same time, let's don't miss all these other vectors,
I think on that note too, it's like coverage is a big thing. I know you mentioned the OS side, which EWS, and then the what is it, the Outlook Anywhere, whatever it was before there was the modern authentication, there is essentially a way to bypass, right? So people would just use mobile to attack it. But I think the other aspect is coverage. Like they would implement it on 1 or 2 things and then not implement it anywhere else, and then get surprised when they had an incident or breach, right? So making sure that the deployment actually gets across all the applications from a security perspective is another big piece that I've seen be a pretty big gap that aligns with what you're talking about.
Yeah, and with Azure specifically, you have conditional access policies, which give you so much more like I guess like ability to manage how and where users can log in. So you can get down to like the device location, the IP addresses, the browsers even. Like you can say like I want to have MFA applied to desktop browsers, but not mobile browsers. So like you mentioned, like people will just use mobile and get around MFA. So I actually I published a tool a few weeks ago called Mfa Sweep, which actually just tries to authenticate to most of the different portals. I say all, but most of the different ways that you could authenticate to to Azure. So things like you have the different APIs, like you have the Azure Service Management API, you have the method of just logging in with a browser, right? Like straight up, like I'm gonna open up a browser. How does that look? And then the mobile user agents, hitting EWS, ActiveSync, all these different options. So yeah, I mean the coverage though, like you said, like making sure that it's like all these different areas are covered is the big thing.
Yeah, you'll see people push out MFA to all their users and everything in the browser, but then the admins can still connect with remote PowerShell, like single auth. So that's fine.
Did you get any reaction from Microsoft on like publishing those tools?
No, not really. I mean, in the past, I mean, most of the time, Microsoft's been pretty good about like liking to see the stuff come out. Like a lot of times, like we'll have tools that, like for example, Mail Sniper is one I wrote to back in the day that would search through email, and I've seen it referenced in multiple Microsoft posts. Like that, it's something that they're fine with. Like they don't see it as a problem.
Yeah.
Actually, the MFA Sweep side of things, I think brings up, the conversation about password spring, because like that's, initially, like, if we look at finding a vector in that's single factor, we have to have a credential first, right? Like if we have to be able to authenticate, and they just started putting in some newer protections for password spring as well, which I wanted to bring that up because I just saw that last week that they added in, it was, I think it's under risk detection in Azure. They have they've started to detect, they say machine learning, to detect password spring attacks better, which I haven't actually tested it yet, but I mean it sounds pretty legit, because one of the things that we talk about in my class is there's this thing called Smart Lockout in Azure, which Smart Lockout is basically the method for detecting brute force attacks or password spring attacks, and then locking out an IP address from being able to successfully log in. So one of the things that we talk about is using like a multi-proxy, something similar to like Fireprox or Proxy Cannon, to basically just rotate IP addresses, because it's all related to a single IP address. And I think that from what I gather, this is supposed to take that to another level. So something kind of cool. It does take Azure Premium P2 license though, so that's I saw Amanda tweet about like the just having to pay for your logs. Like it's crazy.
I feel if you have the ability to do something, you should just automatically get the logging for it.
Right. Like why hide the logs for me?
Ridiculous.
In general, this is a pretty big problem with SaaS services, because like they upcharge you for security features, right? And so like even when you're buying like Salesforce.com, like the major reason people upgrade is for SSO. Like that seems pretty asinine, but it's the reality of like what they built into their tiers, right? From a control perspective. So yeah, I mean, price does become a barrier, especially for the cost-conscious companies. As far as like what controls even to get in place with the native cloud platforms, right? Which is pretty interesting from seeing. I'm kind of curious. So like difference, and I think a lot of the tools you've wrote and developed are around Microsoft. What's your perception of Microsoft versus AWS versus GCP, and what's available from those products from a security perspective? Is there anything that stands out to you?
Yeah. So the majority of the assessments that we do at Black Hills are for customers that typically end up using Microsoft products. Like at the end of the day, Active Directory is the heart of most organizations, and with everyone using O365 now that everyone's working remote, that has become the forefront of pretty much all our attacks. If we're doing a red team assessment or just even like external penetration tests. So that's really where like the necessity for me working mainly on like Microsoft products has come from. That being said, AWS is the other huge one we see a lot, because a lot of companies just can easily spin up web servers or host various products. If they're using Lambda functions or containers or whatever on AWS, and then GCP is probably like one of the least, I guess, like relative ones that we see on assessments, and it's something that's still out there. Like it's a very popular platform, But from an actual like attack standpoint, looking at Active Directory has become let me back up. Looking at Azure Active Directory has become the forefront of where we're really trying to place our attacks. And the reason is because at the end of the day, we generally want to establish either some sort of C2 or establish some sort of access to an account that provide more access to other things in the network. If you look at like AWS servers, like let's say that a company uses AWS or GCP for just instances, just compute instances. Generally, those aren't tied to an internal network, or they're not tied to a domain most of the time. I would say the majority of what I see is just like single instances spun up for certain purposes. Like maybe it's a web server with a database, which a lot of times that can be interesting information. A lot of times that can be, it can be critical info for the company. But I would say 90% of the time, what we're actually targeting is the internal infrastructure, right? We want to either phish somebody or get access to their credentials and then utilize that access to pivot further. And with Azure, with all the other products that are implemented with an Azure account, with an Azure AD account, things like SharePoint, things like, Outlook, you now have access to the user email, potential files they're storing on SharePoint. And I think that's really what drives, why we end up targeting that more than anything else.
It's just like looking at all three of them, Microsoft has such a such a huge footprint, and like they offer pretty much everything that an enterprise could use, right? And it's all tied together.
Oh yeah.
Whereas like Google and AWS, it's just like a cloud hosting thing more than like legit infrastructure just moved to the cloud.
And I mean, so with Google, I mean, you do have G Suite, right? Which there's a lot of organizations that utilize G Suite. But I would say that the majority that we end up seeing, and I I'm just speaking for from Black Hill's perspective, like the customers that we end up testing, we do have a few G Suite customers here and there, but it's like minimal compared to the O365 environments.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah, I think, and then I think you're right in regards to the Microsoft adoption in broad. I think too, there's some combination of like, yeah, if regionally or a certain industry, right, you're going to see more of the G Suites of the world. I would say once you get into tech or you get West Coast, is where you would see that a little bit more. If we're talking about customers that are both, and I think most are some aspect of hybrid or multi-cloud, right, where they have Azure, they likely have instances of AWS. Like, kind of curious on your front, like how often are you coming across, and I see more and more often like people are spread across two different, because like they, for one purpose, spin up this, someone else comes along and spins up an Azure instance, and then the next thing you know, they have two different environments, and they all have good intention to consolidate, but it ends up being a 5-year project.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm kind of curious, like the sense of what you're seeing, and then from a pen testing perspective, like what's your success rate of actually getting in, and what's the, how often are people actually doing any detection in those environments as well?
Yeah, so when it comes to like hybrid environments, I would say the majority of what we see is your on-prem that are either still trying to move to the cloud, and generally what they do is they just spin up O365, and some of them might enable like password hash synchronization to start out with, meaning that your credentials are all managed in O365. More often than not, though, what we're seeing is customers that are taking that full step and saying, "Hey, I want to completely move Azure AD. I want to use all the services that Microsoft has to offer, and just throwing everything there." The AWS side of things and GCP still, I mean, again, like I see it mostly as like one-off stuff, a lot of development stuff too. Like for example, if I'm doing a phishing assessment, or let's say like a straight up spear phishing assessment, the majority of the time I'm just targeting developers now, because I want to get some sort of AWS access or some sort of Azure access. In terms of like success rates, it has gotten a lot harder to do any sort of email-based phishing. And what I mean by that is that most organizations have trained their users to identify phishing messages, first of all. Secondly, email security products like the gateways and stuff that are in between the end user, the employee, and the attacker have gotten like so much better. Whether it be the email gateway that's like labeling a message as spam, or if it's getting to the user's inbox and then a web proxy detects something. Even the browsers. So for example, I have had multiple engagements now where Google Chrome and Firefox safe browsing have burned my credential harvesting server before I even got to even send it. And it's because I tested it, and they see like a new site spun up with like a Microsoft Online login portal, and they'll start labeling it as a it's what's the word? It's not malicious. It's deceptive site.
Okay.
So it'll do the deceptive site ahead thing. So phishing's gotten hard. I would say that the majority of the time that we actually end up having success is when customers are either not having a really good EDR product on the desktop, which that has become like the main standard, right? Is do they have EDR? Do they have
Hey, what do you consider good? Because I think we have a lot of customers that use a lot of different products, and we'll give our perspective, right? But is there any specifically that come to mind?
So I don't want to label any names specifically, but
right?
What I'll say is more general name or generalized, I guess like generalization about EDR products in general, is that easily to manage, because pushing this stuff out, like if you even go back to like application whitelisting, behavioral analysis, like Carbon Black, that kind of stuff, those products can take more work to implement and train to actually detect something accurately. And I think that having the ability to train them quickly, and even with a small team, is really like the game changer right there. Because like if you're a one-man security person, or at a company, and you're trying to push out EDR to all your hosts, that can be a lot of work, and you will probably be hated by most of your company.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree. It's like the quick wins. The quick wins EDR, for instance, yeah, it's like if you have to take a ton of time going around installing things on endpoints, you're not going to get to success, right? I think that's become more and more common with security controls, is like it has to get in place and work. I mean, and that's kind of what we see at Blumira as well. Is it's like if you can't get a product in with a couple hours worth of someone's time, they're probably going to move on to the next thing, because the reality of like there's not enough time in the day, especially for the small organizations that are running IT, and security is just like a additional thing they have to do. So
the other thing I think too is the detection from an endpoint and having like other layers, like is really what makes us trying to do phishing so hard, because there's bypasses for everything. Like if you say like here's the latest advanced EDR, it's been tuned, we can probably figure out a way to bypass that given enough time. But you combine that with an email gateway filter, you combine that with a web proxy that is only allowing categorized sites and analyzing SSL, and you combine all these things, it makes it really hard. And then on top of that, the user themselves, right? Like having them being able to identify phishing messages. So funny story. I was doing a phishing assessment for a company, and it was a purple team assessment. So I was working with the customer, and so we had a Slack up, and I sent a phish in, and they're like, oh yeah, we detected you. And he sent me a screenshot of their SOC analyst answering a message to, I guess like the employee had reported it as a potential, like malicious message to the SOC analyst. And then he's like, oh wait. And then he showed me the next like set of chat with the SOC analyst. The SOC analyst had written back, no, that looks legit. Keep going. So, I mean, like you have stuff like that. I mean, security's hard, like you have all these layers, but I don't know. Like I think that at the end of the day, like the detection is a must, right? Like being able to detect the stuff, and then have your SOC analyst being able to actually do an investigation maybe into it and see that it's actually malicious. But
yeah, good training opportunity.
Yeah,
For sure.
Yeah, all too common, the phishing aspect. Like, yeah, it's good to see the platforms are getting better about it. Because for a very long time they weren't tackling the problem at all. I mean, it's still a problem that you need the complementary tools for, right? But at least they're doing incrementally more from a detection perspective, and especially as people have moved to cloud email, right? There's more built in than your traditional Exchange applications like that. So, on the detection side, right? Like, what other things should people be looking at? We talked about credentials being high target, right? In Azure AD and Active Directory. You know, what other things do you commonly see that are either misconfigurations? I know you mentioned conditional access being one of them, right? Where it's just blatantly like a common problem that stands out that you come across again and again. Anything in particular?
So the one that probably makes the most, I guess, like news is open buckets, right? Like S3 buckets, and you know, a lot of people don't understand that that's not just an AWS specific thing. You know, Azure has blob storage, GCP has storage, and there's ways to make those public as well. So I think that, you know, like that's one of the big problems, right? Like having you know, public storage enabled, and having your I don't know, developers or whoever is utilizing these products publish this stuff. And like, you know, we talked about at the beginning, it's become harder to just publish something publicly as an S3 bucket. There's more clicks you have to take to make that happen. But it still happens. I mean, you see it in the news all the time. You know, you see publicly exposed buckets all the time. So that's one thing. Another thing is like the actual access keys stored in code, right? So, you know, GitHub does a good job of making sure that doesn't happen, but you know, they're looking for common things like your typical AWS like access keys or programmatic access keys. But there's a ton of other keys that can possibly be stored there, right? Like you can have custom code with custom application keys that gets published publicly. That's another thing. I would say that, you know, from a detection standpoint, you know,
those are both two very hard things to detect.
Yeah, right. Those are both very hard things to detect. I don't know. Maybe it takes inventorying applications and inventorying GitHub accounts of people who work at your company, and then checking them. And, you know, not just GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, any of the
because
sites.
I mean, you could, in theory, like put anything out there, and it's not going to be in your list of public IPs that you normally scan. Right? It's just now out on, like, how do you track that? Yeah, that's just going to continue to be a problem.
I think to some extent you might complement or try and solve the problem with honey tokens. I'm trying to think of like leveraging AWS honey token in code to realize then someone tries to use it, right? That could be one approach. I don't know if that's the most. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, the problem with that is that, you know, what if somebody uses a real token though? Like, what if somebody accidentally publishes some real tokens? You know.
Yep.
So on that note, you know, AWS, Azure, they all have different tools. Like you have Sentinel in Azure, you have CloudTrail in AWS. You can start looking at the logs of access and maybe try to start correlating based off that.
Now, what about where was I going to go there? Sorry, Amanda, if you want to talk at all about the correlation stuff. My mind's a little bit tired today.
No, you're fine. I was going to go back to some of the detection stuff that we were talking about. Oh, you had mentioned the different Fireprox stuff, right? Where you can change
rotate IPs.
Yeah, rotate IPs and what you're doing password spray on, which I attempted to do against like all of our different services and stuff, and that's also fairly difficult to detect. And that's when I found in those same logs that it will tell you that you're attempting to do it via PowerShell, and if you're trying to bypass multi-factor auth. So it'll tell you which one you have enabled for the thing that you're trying to password spray on. at least in Azure. So that was kind of interesting.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, so the client ID is the problem with that is that client ID gets passed with a web request to like while you're trying to authenticate. So that's something that you can actually change to make look like a different client. That might not be the thing to trigger off of.
Other than that, there's nothing that they give in the logs.
Oh man, yeah, that's brutal.
So please just don't change your client ID when you're attempting this.
Right.
I need to grab the API picture that Nick. I think it's in a Slack channel of like the 3 or 4 APIs of Microsoft where you get like half of the data from each one of them in order to actually get a full data set. It's rather complicated.
Yep.
If it's something you haven't done before.
Definitely. Yeah. It's a lot of people don't understand like how it's split, right? Like you have the Azure AD side of things, then you have Azure, which is like all the services and resources and things like that. And it's not like a super clear like, wait, why is Azure different than Azure AD? But it's definitely different.
How do you feel about the renaming of ATP to Defender?
So I don't have any qualms with it. I think that it's
a good product.
Yeah, it's definitely a good product. I'll say this: Defender on the desktop is actually really damn good. Like Defender does a great job.
Yep.
So Microsoft has the advantage of seeing pretty much everything that happens on their endpoints, right? So and they also have the advantage of being able to write code that directly talks to AMSI, which is part of their OS. Like there's a bunch of EDR vendors that talk to AMSI too, but it's a third party still talking to a Microsoft product. If you have a Microsoft product talking to a Microsoft product, or Microsoft software, I should say, you have just a ton of more advantage, right? And they do a great job of just detecting a ton of stuff. Like they do an awesome job.
Yeah.
I have a question on that note, right? So do you recommend customers roll an EDR plus Defender or one or the other?
Yeah, no. So I like the EDR plus Defender model. I think that's pretty good. I think that on the EDR side of things, I'd focus more on the behavior modules or behavior detections, and then not so much like heuristic and like not so much the like just checking hashes for certain malware kind of stuff, because Defender is going to cover most of that. Because you don't want two things like fighting, right? Like you don't want two products fighting over the same file, because that just takes resources. But I do like EDR plus Defender. Yeah.
I remember what I was going to ask you earlier. So, I mean, very often on the corporate side, if someone has a server infrastructure firewall, very often they end up exposing things they shouldn't, like RDP, FTP, insecure ports and protocols. I'm curious how much of that you see in the cloud infrastructure side, right? When you compare, and if people commonly make similar mistakes, or a lot of times they just, like, I'll be honest, there's a lot of people that don't even know they shouldn't put RDP on the internet, right?
Right. Just go to Shodan and search for RDP servers.
I'm wearing my Census shirt today.
Yeah, or Census, yeah.
We love you both. I might be biased and maybe an investor, so.
Does Census have the image search like Shodan has, where you can just search like RDP images?
I can't tell. I don't know. When you say RDP images, I know.
Yeah. So I think it's actually just images.shodan.io. I'm pretty sure that's the site. You can just search for RDP or VNC servers, and it's just like pictures of everyone's open VNC or open RDP server.
Oh,
yeah,
wow,
it's awesome. Like you can just scroll through all the pictures. It's amazing.
Yeah. On the Census side, they've got more into discovery of active monitoring, right? So when that stuff pops up, right, you're aware as an organization, a little bit deeper on the monitoring side, I would say. But yeah, both are great products, and especially to gain visibility into like real risk and threat.
So for your
from
question,
an exposure perspective.
So for your question about opening that stuff up, we see it pretty often on customers where they'll have, SSH is a pretty common one. FTP is a pretty common one. The ones that we typically identify that, we talk to the customers and say like, hey, this is probably a bad idea is like you said, RDP. SMB, actually, surprisingly, we do see some SMB servers open, which is, that's bad. From a perspective of on-prem versus cloud, I think that most organizations are having to relearn like how firewalls work, because in the traditional sense of an on-prem network, you have this gateway device, right, that is just there, that has an interface and has a web portal that I can say, oh, this is my in and out. I know what's going in, I know what's going out, I know which ports. Hopefully it doesn't have like 300 rules, and you're like, you don't really know what's going in and out at that point. But when it comes to cloud in Azure specifically, or AWS even, you can spin up firewalls, but the majority of the time what you're looking at is just the host-based firewalls, right? Because if I go spin up a VM in Azure, that has its own interface, right? Like, and I can start analyzing the ports and stuff that are open there. And I would say that, looking at the differences, you have to be more explicit about what you allow on your cloud-based hosts. I mean, I'm whenever you spin up, let's see, Linux, I'm 99% sure you're going to have SSH open. If you spin up Windows, I'm 99% sure RDP is going to be open, because that's the way that Azure gives you access. So those are two things that like it's just going to be open unless you set up new rules to stop it from happening.
Yeah. So kind of default, not necessarily the most secure in those instances. So I've come across customers that have any rules open firewall, the no firewall rules, I guess. And I kind of, this is kind of funny one, but earlier this year I thought it was funny where I tell the story once in a while. Customers like, yeah, we have RDP accessible, and it's like, well, you're not supposed to do that. And they're like, well, the compliance of our partner told us we couldn't use a VPN, and we figured it'd just be easier to use RDP directly. And so, like, yeah, it's funny how compliance comes into these things sometimes and just so blows away the intention.
The big problem there, right, is that your logging is your eyes are off of the firewall logs at that point. Your eyes have to be on like your internal domain logs, because whenever you're looking at attacking that, I mean, brute force attacks, password sprays, whatever, you're typically authenticating directly to the domain at that point, right? Like you're authenticating to the RDP server, which is talking to a DC on the inside. And so like now, like if you have like, let's say you have like, I don't know, anything internal that's alerting on password spraying, well, now it's coming from your RDP server, and I don't know, like that could just confuse things, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple ways from a detection perspective on where you'd want to look. I think it's a combination of that host-based, cloud infrastructure-based, or network-based, right? That's going to help catch those sorts of things from a detection standpoint. So, I did a second ago. I did ask, and I was just pulling this up. Where did it go? From a cloud platform perspective, most people on here use Azure and then a combination of AWS and GCP, which is kind of expected. I mean, that's pretty typical of what we see in working and talking with customers as well. From a deployment perspective, I think it's funny. I mean, on the deployment side for us, like when we deploy Blumira, I'd say probably 35% of the time we'll see RDP, SMB, or other things open with connections, right? And yeah, I mean, pretty quickly people are surprised. I also think on the pen testing side, like your experience in this, it's like, yeah, pen tests are generally trend pretty red, or more red than they should. And I think the shocking thing sometimes is like it's getting better where people are taking action, right? But like it can go over multiple years that not much has changed. Is the other thing. I think security has become a lot more top of mind over the last 3 to 5 years, where you don't see that as much, but it's that combination of like compliance versus security versus status quo. I think that is an interesting.
Yeah, it's super interesting whenever we get hired by compliance teams versus security teams, because sometimes we'll have customers that contact us and it's the compliance department, or it's like the CFO that wants to check their security for their organization, and the security team's kept completely in the dark. Those are always interesting scenarios because they allow us to basically perform these assessments without the security team knowing, and then it becomes more of like, hey, we caught you and started blocking you, as opposed to, or hey, we saw you, we're not going to block you because we want to continue this testing. We want to see what happens from here. But it's always interesting to see like that balance between compliance and security. Usually compliance don't really give security a whole lot of, I don't know. I'm trying to think of the right way to say this. Like, usually, so let me give you an example. I did an assessment for a company that the compliance team hired us. We absolutely completely compromised them remotely. It was bad. It was one of those cases where we got into their email, and VPN certs to log in over VPN were in the user's email. So we were able to just install the cert, log into VPN. And this organization actually had really good like north-south detections, but east-west, like pivoting on the inside, was like not seen at all. And actually trying to phish them would have been really bad too, because it had some really good endpoint protections. But talking to the domain from the VPN itself, they didn't see any of that. And
wow.
And yeah, at the end of the day, like we ended up getting like domain admin stuff from the outside, like just pivoting in. And so the compliance team, they never told the security team about this at all, and we gave them a report, and then the security team's like just destroyed, because they're like, we thought we had everything like it was good. So they actually they flew me down to talk to them in person, and we did like a week of just like training, like this is what we do, that's how we did it. And their security team is actually awesome, like they're really amazing people.
Yeah.
But they were pissed because the compliance team didn't even tell them about this, and
wow.
Yeah. I think it's a balance. Like, I think there's a balance of checks and balances, right? Because like, if you know it's coming, you know to look, right? So there's some balance of that aspect, but like, it's also doesn't feel good when someone tests you on something like that and you don't know. But that's the reality of most attacks, right?
True.
Is you don't know they're coming. So I do think sometimes this exercise of like, let's get ready, here it comes, is a little bit on the false sense of security side.
Mm-hmm.
Although like it regardless, it's a good place to start from an exercise perspective.
Mm-hmm.
As well. So Amanda, what are you thinking right now on the detection side?
I just get angry at all the cloud providers. Just when you move from detecting on-prem, where the firewall logs and Windows logs give you probably more information than you ever care to know.
Mm-hmm.
And then you move to trying to detect things in the cloud, where things are a little bit more nebulous, but they give you
where the vendor only puts half the information in their API.
Yeah, and then you have to pay if you want more logging, and sometimes even then it's not even
sometimes
enough.
This stuff doesn't even show up, like service principal authentication to Azure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which I think, like, if you dug into the actual logs, it does show it, right? I think we talked about that. So one of the things I talk about in my class is like the ability to log in as a service principal to Azure does not show up in the sign-on log in the like Azure portal. So like if I authenticate as an Azure user, but I think once you dig into the log, it's actually there, right?
Yeah, which is weird. It's something that should show up in the portal.
Yeah. Why? I don't know.
I think on the cloud side, it just goes to show like you kind of need more defense in depth because of the limitations, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are things that you can see happening, but like you can't see, like, for example, what PowerShell commands are you running remotely? You can't see that.
Well,
at all.
I mean, also from a product development perspective, I can appreciate being in the product side, right? Like at Duo, putting information into the API was an afterthought.
Mm-hmm.
And probably would, like a lot of times in some instances, even years later before it actually happened, until enough customers shamed you, right? So
I like customers that say we're building API, we're building API first. I'm like, all right, I can get behind that.
No, it's good. I think like, yeah, a lot of people say that.
Yeah.
And their actions are different, but yeah, I think a lot of times it's like, yeah, there is this combination of delay on the API side with a lot of products, right? Where the first intention is get it in the product, right, and then extract it later. And I think the design process a lot of times forgets about those pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And then until enough customers bang support store, right, and it becomes a real requirement and need, it doesn't get done. And I think that's very, very common in the security industry with security products as well. So yeah, that's a fun, unique circumstance to deal with from a logging perspective that you're talking about, Amanda. We're gonna have you help mature the other cloud providers' APIs. Hey, so the different tests that you have, right? I'm familiar with like the O365 password spraying. I think the regular Active Directory password spraying. You mentioned the new way to test your Azure infrastructure from an authentication perspective. Any other tools you want to mention, either yours or other ones that people should be considering leveraging and using from a security perspective to make sure they have the right controls in place?
Yeah. I mean, so from a red teaming like external context, one of the main attacks we do is credential harvesting, right? And that's not the password spraying like directly side of things, but actually like having a user log into a portal we control and then getting their clear text password that way. And one of the main ways to do that is through reverse proxying to the actual application. So like a tool like EvilGenX2 is a common one, or Modlishka is another one, where you can actually point it to the originating server. So like I would basically, let's say I was trying to phish somebody's O365 credential. I'd point it to Microsoft Online and they go to my server. It's a different domain, but it looks like the Microsoft Online portal, right? They go to log in. Not only their creds, but their cookies as well would be harvested as and actually be passed to the backend server. So they're actually literally logged in on the backside. So that's one of the things that, like I would say like that's a good one to look at. What else? One of the things that I think there's been a lot of at least research and attacks into this that I think that there's been enough defensive steps taken to prevent from happening, but this thing called illicit consent grant attack, it's a OAuth applications basically. So what you do is you create like a Microsoft O365 OAuth application. So this would be something that you specify has permissions to do something in an account. And like, how like when you go to install an app on any phone, right? Like on let's say it's an Android phone or iPhone, it says, hey, this app wants permission to read your mail, or hey, this app wants permission to see your contacts. Same thing, but think on O365 now. So the user gets a link to a Microsoft Online portal. They click it, and it says, hey, this application wants to have access to your email. And if you click consent, that application, which the attacker controls, now has the ability to log in and read your email. Mm-hmm. And I think, I'm pretty sure that I saw that that's what happened to Sands whenever Sands got attacked a few months ago.
Okay.
They had an illicit consent grant attack happen. That's one of the things that I would say is it's newish and probably hasn't had enough news to be on the forefront. But there have also been new protections put in place. Like they prevented the ability for new applications that were created by non-verified account. So like if I go spin up an O365 account like today and create an application, users can't consent to those applications. So there's some things there, right? Like that help protect, but it's an interesting one because that one you don't have to try to trick a user into entering their credentials. You don't have to trick them into running a payload or running macros in an Excel spreadsheet on their desktop. They just literally click a button and you have access to their email now.
Oh, you're muted, Patrick.
Great. I think it's interesting. I mean, those controls are important, and I think plugins as well. I do remember, I mean, early days of Duo. I don't know if you ever heard of like Cloud to Butt, but essentially it was an extension that replaced the word cloud with butt. And it's funny because someone installed it on our HR director's computer, and all the postings online for positions were like butt engineer. So I think, yeah, I think there's some, like, a lot of times employees don't realize what they're doing is like they're giving access or installing something that is intended to be funny, but has strong security consequences, right?
Right.
When you're essentially granting access to that control to do certain things from an application perspective. So yeah, that's it's a real risk. I know, like we played around a lot in the early days before you start to realize the security implications of that. And Cage, I think, was the other one. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but it changes all your images to Nicolas Cage.
No.
The security of plugins that can read and change all the data in your browser.
Yeah.
I
don't remember what it's called, but I do think at Duo we released a plugin. And this is maybe before Chrome had it or Google had it, but it was basically a Chrome extension manager that would prevent you from installing any that aren't authorized, right? I think at this point that's built into G Suite is my guess. But yeah, those sorts of things are particularly important when you're talking about installing third-party plugins or other applications. I do think the other interesting thing on the security side is, I don't know if you saw in Chrome the new update button that goes green, like that seems like in the last week. That I think that's pretty cool because it actually is encouraging the user to, like, hey, this is green, it's okay, just click here. It's like a phishing campaign to actually increase your security, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It's fun stuff. Did you notice that, or have you seen that?
I haven't noticed it yet. No.
On my home computer popped up. Yeah, and my home computer popped up when it was out of date to basically just restart Chrome, right? Is the purpose behind it. So I don't know, cool little stuff that I think, like, Chrome is a good example of, like, similar to SaaS model, the stuff just updates. So it takes some of that security burden away, which is nice.
So Chrome's, was it enhanced safe browsing, I think is what they call it. Like, so there's safe browsing and then there's enhanced safe browsing now, which just came out, I think it was like May. From what I understand is that is what will start analyzing websites you visit. And as you start visiting, like those, like I mentioned, like the malicious sites, right? It updates all the browsers within 30 minutes of seeing that. Like, it's crazy, like how fast.
Wow. I know. Yeah. And I think time is valuable, right? From a security perspective. Hey, there's a few questions we have. One about the Office 365 credentials. Yeah, I think we talked more about that, so we're good. If there are any other questions, we have about 6 more minutes. And then I was just going to show something. I think we talked about similar to some of this, but I want to show a few. And this is pertaining to G Suite. I was just going to show an example in a second once I get this demo up and running, where on the Blumira side. Oh man, where are my creds? Oh, good times. Just on the detection side of, like, some of the common things or low-hanging fruit of value, I find it interesting. Like, we collaborate a lot outside the organization, and even getting visibility when you're what I would consider to be a smaller organization into, like, what's being shared would be an example. New administrator account creations, right? Like, things going on that necessarily you're not paying much attention to.
You said this is on G Suite?
Yeah, we do a lot of this on G Suite and Office 365 in product, right? And I want to see if, go ahead.
I was going to say, are you looking at calendar injections at all?
Amanda can answer that one.
No, it's on the list.
Oh, calendar. Yeah, right now document sharing's one. administrator account creation, right, is a pretty big low-hanging fruit, like auditing that.
Creating what is it, like app passwords, guest users,
Oh, nice.
New SPNs.
Awesome.
Unlikely location from a
I just
geography
finished all of those.
perspective. But yeah, I mean, the nice thing here is like we do cover O365 and G Suite and giving visibility and control on these things, right? So it's that kind of cross architecture infrastructure depending on like what the customer's using, right? And it's more or less to surface the real risks that you care about or need to care about, right? From a security perspective. So just wanted to I wasn't sharing my screen when I showed it, was I?
You weren't.
Oh, that's a great
No, I missed it.
I wondered.
Great demo.
There we go.
Yeah, I was hopping in here and just showing.
There we go.
Right?
Oh,
Okay.
sweet.
Yeah, so like a detection of, hey, a new account administrator, like from an audit perspective, like it's not a threat, but it's something you should at least validate, right?
Oh yeah.
When something like that
Nice.
that happens. And so I mean, domain admin is like usually in the late stage of an attack, right? And people are not typically auditing it. Would be an example, and here's the same example within Active Directory. But yeah, on the G Suite side, things like geographic unlikely location, those sorts of things triggering them, right? So I can actually take action and reset a credential, for instance. And all too often, like this might also be someone sharing creds, right? You see all sorts of things happen within an organization and companies, right? That maybe shouldn't be happening, that impact from a security perspective. So I don't know if you want to mention anything else, Amanda, on the on some of the cloud examples, but
no, that's good.
Cool. Hey, any last questions? We have 3 more minutes, and then, well, I guess you should start playing a guitar riff. No? Hey, the election's next week. Can you play the national anthem, Jimi Hendrix style?
Yeah, but
we can't put him on the spot like that, man.
Oh, all right. Well, hey, if you wanna rip something off while people ask questions, if we get any, it's up to you. We did get some questions about which amps you have, Mesa Boogie.
Yeah,
or
it's an Electrodyne, yeah. No, I totally would. I'm pretty sure like my 3-week-old is sleeping like in the other room.
Congrats!
Thanks.
Wow, 3 weeks old. Is that your first?
This is our third.
Wow.
Very nice.
Kids. Sweet. I'm about to go on the questions of your secret questions from here, but I'm going to stop.
I'm totally outnumbered now.
What are their names? When were they born? No, that's awesome. That's exciting. Well, congrats. And thanks for taking the time to hop on and talk a little bit about cloud detection.
No, that's awesome. Thanks for having me.
Practices. And then last off, you said you have class next week.
Yeah, teaching breaching the cloud next Monday.
Highly
Wild
recommend.
West Hackers.
Wild West Hackenfest is the website to hit for that.
Cool. So if anybody else wants to spend some more time learning about cloud security, hop on there. And yeah, thanks so much for the time today. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Sorry you can't do your guitar. I totally acknowledge waking up kids.
I actually just posted a video on Twitter today if you want to go look there.
Playing guitar or putting the kid to sleep?
Yeah. No, it's just so John Strand, our owner at Black Hills, and I play at Wild West Hackenfest every year. And yeah, we played last year, so I did like a throwback today for it.
Hey, I got a question. So Black Hills is South Dakota, but you're in Florida.
Yeah, we're spread out.
Florida?
No, most of us are spread out. Like I would say 40% of the company's probably up there. Most of us are remote though.
Sweet. I mean, everybody's remote nowadays, right? I ended up getting an office in an old classroom, if you can't tell. So I have a chalkboard. I had to get out of the house. But literally, it's an empty school, and I think I'm the only person here all day.
What?
So it's kind of
cool.
creepy.
I was about to say it's gotta be creepy.
You just start climbing up in the ceilings and seeing what you can find.
I want to bring my skate ramps in because like there's a lot of open space. I don't know, it could be fun, and then it's a mixture of like you kind of feel like you're in Stranger Things, right?
Yeah. Oh, you're in like the upside down right now.
Oh my goodness.
Shop for the Demogorgers.
Oh man, awesome. Well, hey, thanks so much for the time. Thanks for everybody joining, and great questions today. Check out Daft Hack